The metal corridors of the Earth Defense Force ship Horizon echoed with the steady hum of its engines. Captain James Miller stood at the bridge, his weathered hands resting on the control panel as he stared out into the vast darkness of space. After 15 years of serving as a bridge between humans and the Galactic Alliance, he thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. "Captain, you need to see this," called Bill, the ship's sensor operator. His voice trembled slightly, something the captain had never heard before from the usually calm technician. Miller walked over to Bill's station, his boots making soft sounds against the metal floor. The sensor screen showed something that made his heart skip a beat, a massive tear in the fabric of space itself, glowing with an eerie purple light. "How big is it?" Miller asked, keeping his voice steady despite the worry building in his chest. "About the size of Earth's moon right now, sir," Bill replied, his fingers dancing across the controls. "But that's not the scary part. It's growing. Fast." The bridge crew fell silent. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Alliance for 30 years, still considered newcomers among the 15 advanced alien species that made up the Alliance. Most of these species looked down on humans, seeing them as primitive beings who had barely mastered space travel. But right now, none of that mattered. "Send a priority message to Alliance Command," Miller ordered, "and get me a direct line to Earth Defense Force headquarters." As the communications officer worked to establish the connections, Miller watched the strange tear through the ship's main viewport. It pulsed like a living thing, sending out waves of energy that made the ship's sensors scream in protest. The response from the Alliance came faster than expected. A holographic image appeared on the bridge, showing Ambassador Reed from Earth and several alien representatives. The aliens' expressions were hard to read. Some were crystalline beings, others looked like floating clouds of gas, but their agitation was clear in their movements. "Captain Miller," the Earth ambassador spoke first. "Please explain what you found." Miller described the tear and shared the sensor data. As he spoke, he noticed the alien representatives becoming more and more still, a sign of extreme distress among most species in the Alliance. The Luminar representative, a crystalline being named First Light of Dawn, which humans mercifully shortened to Dawn, spoke next. Their voice came through the translator as a calm, metallic sound. "This is most troubling. Our preliminary analysis suggests this is a crack in the very fabric of spacetime. If it continues to grow at its current rate, it could consume entire solar systems within months." Miller watched as the alien representatives began discussing the situation among themselves, their voices a mix of different translations overlapping. He noticed something interesting. While the aliens were clearly concerned, they were all approaching the problem with pure logic and calculations. None of them seemed to feel the gut-wrenching fear that he and his human crew were experiencing. "We will need to convene an emergency session of the Galactic Council," Dawn announced. "Captain Miller, please maintain observation of the anomaly from a safe distance. Do not, under any circumstances, approach it closer than your current position." After the transmission ended, Miller turned to his crew. He saw in their eyes the same thing he was feeling, a mixture of fear and determination. Humans might be considered reckless by the other species, but Miller knew better. It wasn't recklessness, it was courage. The willingness to face danger when necessary, to risk everything for the greater good. "Sir," Bill called out again, his voice even more worried than before. "The tear, it's growing faster than our initial calculations predicted." Miller nodded grimly. "Keep all sensors focused on it. Document everything. Something tells me humanity might need to step up soon, whether the Alliance likes it or not." As he looked back at the purple tear in space, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery would change everything, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The real question was, would anyone be brave enough to do what needed to be done when the time came? The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched high above, its crystal walls reflecting the light of 3 suns. Representatives from all 15 species of the Alliance gathered in their designated areas. some floating in anti-gravity pods, others standing on raised platforms, and a few swimming in specially designed tanks. Ambassador Reed sat in the human section, trying not to show his frustration. For 6 hours, the council had been calculating probabilities and discussing theories, but taking no action. The massive screen behind the council leaders showed the tear in space growing larger with each passing hour. "Our calculations are clear," announced head counselor Dawn, their crystalline form glowing with concerned pulses of blue light. "Any direct intervention has a 99.9% chance of failure. The risk is too high." Reed stood up, no longer able to contain himself. "With all due respect, while we calculate, entire solar systems are at risk. Captain Miller's latest report shows 3 uninhabited systems have already been consumed. The mines of Proxima, floating brains kept alive in special containers, pulsed with disapproval." Their spokesperson, Masterthink, turned its attention to Reed. "Your human emotion clouds your judgment. We have run 1 million simulations. Every attempt to seal the rift leads to immediate death of the response team. Logic dictates we must find another solution. And how long will that take?" Reed challenged, pointing at the display screen. "The tear is growing faster than our initial predictions. We don't have time for another million simulations." The council chamber erupted in multiple languages, the translation devices struggling to keep up. Reed noticed something interesting. The younger species in the Alliance seemed more inclined to act, while the older, more advanced ones insisted on more calculations. A sudden alert silenced everyone. The main screen switched to a new image. The tear had just swallowed its first inhabited system. Though evacuations had been ordered, thousands of lives were now gone. The vapor beings of Neptune's representative floated forward, their gaseous forms swirling with anxiety. Perhaps the humans have a suggestion. They are known for finding unconventional solutions." Reed activated his data pad, projecting a hologram in the center of the chamber. "We've been working on something. Lieutenant Emma Rogers from Earth Defense Force Research Division has developed a theory. We believe a modified mining vessel, equipped with an experimental quantum inverter, could potentially seal the rift." The chamber fell silent. Then, predictably, the objections began. "Impossible. The energy requirements alone would tear the ship apart. No one could pilot a vessel that close to the anomaly. The crew survival probability is less than 0.1%. Reed waited for the outcry to die down before speaking again. "We know the risks. We also know that doing nothing guarantees the destruction of more systems, more lives. Humanity volunteers to lead this mission." The council leaders huddled together, their private discussion lasting several tense minutes. Finally, head counselor Dawn spoke. "The council cannot support such a dangerous mission. The risk of failure is too high. We will continue to search for a safer solution." Reed's face hardened. He looked around the chamber, seeing the fear hidden behind all the logical arguments and careful calculations. These species, for all their advancement, had lost something along the way. The courage to act when action was needed, regardless of the odds. He stood straight and addressed the council one final time. "Then humanity will act alone. We request no support, no resources, and no permission. We only ask that you don't interfere." As he walked out of the chamber, Reed could hear the shocked murmurs behind him. His communicator buzzed. A message from Captain Miller. "The tear just doubled in size. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast." Reed smiled grimly as he headed toward the Earth Embassy. The other species might think humans were reckless, primitive, or foolish. But sometimes, being brave enough to try the impossible was exactly what the universe needed. Now he just had to find a crew willing to risk everything on a 0.1% chance of success. Looking up at the sky, he could see the tear's purple glow even from the planet's surface. Time was running out, and humanity was about to show the galaxy why they were different from all the rest. Lieutenant Emma Rogers stood in the crowded briefing room at Earth Defense Force headquarters. The room buzzed with tension as she faced 50 of Earth's best pilots, engineers, and scientists. Behind her, a hologram showed the ever-growing tear in space, now large enough to swallow Jupiter whole. "I won't lie to you," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What I'm about to propose is probably a suicide mission." She paused, watching as some people shifted in their seats, but nobody left the room. "We're going to fly a ship into that tear and try to seal it." The room remained silent as she explained her plan. The mining ship Last Hope would be fitted with an experimental quantum inverter, a device that could, in theory, force the tear to collapse in on itself. The hard part: someone would have to pilot the ship directly into the heart of the anomaly. "The aliens think we're crazy," Emma continued, bringing up more diagrams. "They've done their calculations, say it's impossible, say we'll all die trying." She smiled slightly. "But they don't understand something about humans. Sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer." From the back of the room, a hand raised. "What are our actual chances of survival?" asked a tall man with graying hair. 0.1%, Emma replied honestly. "And that's being optimistic." Instead of fear, she saw something else spark in the eyes of those gathered: determination. This was what made humans different. Where other species saw certain death, humans saw a challenge. Admiral Thomas Walker stepped forward from where he'd been watching by the door. "I want to be clear," he said, his voice grave. "This mission is completely voluntary. The Alliance has refused to support us. If you volunteer, you'll be going against the direct advice of the most advanced species in the galaxy." To everyone's surprise, people started standing up. First one, then 5, then 20. Within minutes, the entire room was on their feet. Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I need 3 people," she said. "A pilot who can handle impossible conditions, an engineer who can keep our systems running when everything goes wrong, and a quantum physicist who understands the inverter better than I do." "I'll fly it," said Robert Hayes, stepping forward. He was Earth's best test pilot, known for surviving situations that should have been fatal. Always wanted to do something that's never been done before. David Anderson, a chief engineer with 15 years of experience, stood next. "You'll need someone to keep that ship together when it starts falling apart." "I'm in." "And you'll need someone who understands what we're actually trying to do," said Dr. Mary Cooper, adjusting her glasses. She had helped Emma develop the quantum inverter theory. "Count me in." Admiral Walker looked at the volunteers, his face showing a mix of pride and concern. "You understand what you're signing up for. The other species think this is madness." "With all due respect, sir," Robert replied, "they thought it was madness when we first tried to fly, when we first went to space, when we first broke the light barrier. Being called crazy by aliens is practically a human tradition by now." Emma pulled up the schematics for the Last Hope. They had 48 hours to modify the ship, install the inverter, and launch the mission. The tear was growing faster now, threatening populated systems. As they began planning the modifications, a message came through from the Galactic Council. The alien species had finished another round of calculations, still insisting the mission was impossible. They formally warned that any human attempt to seal the rift would be recorded as a regrettable example of primitive species' inability to accept logical reality. Emma looked at her team. The pilot who smiled in the face of death, the engineer who saw problems as puzzles to be solved, and the physicist who believed in taking chances. This was humanity at its best. Not fearless, but brave enough to act despite their fear. "Let's show them what impossible really means," she said, and they got to work. The launch bay of Earth Defense Force's main station buzzed with activity. Time was running out. The mining ship Last Hope sat in the center. Its hull opened in multiple places as crews worked around the clock to modify it for its impossible mission. David Anderson wiped sweat from his forehead as he reconnected power cables under the ship's main console. "This would be a lot easier if we had access to Alliance technology," he muttered, burning his finger on a hot wire. "We make do with what we have," Mary Cooper replied from her station, where she was calibrating the quantum inverter. The device looked out of place, a collection of Earth's most advanced technology, built from spare parts and theoretical science that the Alliance had abandoned as too dangerous. Robert Hayes walked around the ship's exterior, running his hand along the hull. As the pilot, he needed to know every inch of his vessel. "She's not pretty," he said, "but she's tough. Like us." The ship's modifications were unlike anything attempted before. They had stripped out everything non-essential, reinforced the hull with the strongest materials Earth could produce, and installed experimental shielding that might, just might, give them a few extra seconds near the tear in space. A commotion at the launch bay's entrance drew their attention. A group of alien observers had arrived, their various forms casting strange shadows on the floor. They had come to witness what they believed would be humanity's latest mistake. "Fascinating," said one of the luminars, its crystalline form glowing softly. They continue to work despite knowing the calculations proved their failure. Emma Rogers stepped forward to meet the aliens. "We heard your latest analysis. The tear will reach the nearest populated system in 72 hours. "Correct," the luminar responded, "which is why we are evacuating that sector. It is the logical response." "Running away isn't always the answer," Emma replied firmly. "Sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when the odds are against you." The aliens watched in silence as the humans continued their work. Their sensors recorded everything, probably for some future study on primitive species behavior in crisis situations. Inside the ship, the crew was facing their own challenges. The quantum inverter kept overloading their power systems, and the shield modifications were proving tricky to integrate with their existing technology. "Try routing it through the auxiliary power grid," Mary suggested as another test failed, sending sparks flying from a control panel. David nodded, making the adjustments. "You know, my great-grandfather used to tell stories about fixing cars in his garage. Said sometimes you had to use duct tape and prayers. Never thought I'd be doing the same thing with a spaceship." Robert ran another simulation in the pilot's seat. Each run ended the same way, with the ship being torn apart. But with each failure, he learned a little more, adjusted his approach slightly. "At least the view will be spectacular," he joked, though his eyes remained focused and determined. As the hours ticked by, more crew members from other ships came to help. They'd brought spare parts, tools, and most importantly, their skills and determination. It was like watching a village come together to face a storm, everyone doing their part, no matter how small. Emma looked at her watch. 20 hours until launch. The tear had grown another 10% while they worked. She caught glimpses of the alien observers taking notes, probably documenting what they saw as humanity's last futile gesture. "They think we're going to fail," she said to her team during a brief break. They sat together, sharing coffee and sandwiches, looking at their nearly finished modifications. "Maybe we will," Mary responded, adjusting her glasses. "But we'll fail trying to save everyone, not running away. That counts for something." David patted the ship's hull. "You know what the difference is between us and them. They see a 0.1% chance of success and think it's impossible. We see it and think, 'So you're telling me there's a chance?'" Robert grinned. "Besides, someone has to be that 1 in 1,000. Might as well be us." They returned to work as the alien observers continued their vigil, watching as humanity prepared to attempt the impossible. The last hope was living up to its name, not just for Earth, but for every species too afraid to take the chance. The last hope broke away from Earth's defense station, its engines glowing bright against the darkness of space. Inside the ship, Robert Hayes gripped the controls tightly. Warning lights already flashed across his console. Their modifications were pushing the ship's systems to their limits. "All stations, report," Emma called from her command seat. "Engineering ready," David responded, his fingers dancing across multiple screens. Though ready is a generous term for what we've cobbled together. Quantum inverter is stable, Mary added, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. At least as stable as an experimental device can be. Through the main viewport, they could see their destination. The tear had grown to a horrifying size, its purple edges rippling like angry waves in a cosmic ocean. Even from this distance, their instruments were going crazy. Receiving transmissions from multiple Alliance vessels, Emma announced. They're maintaining observation positions at maximum safe distance. She paused, reading the incoming data. They're still trying to talk us out of this. Robert adjusted their course, compensating for the growing gravitational distortions. Tell them to take good notes. This might be the most interesting thing they've seen in 1,000 years. As they drew closer, the true scale of their mission became apparent. The tear wasn't just a hole in space. It was a wound in reality itself. Stars behind it appeared distorted, and light bent in impossible ways around its edges. First checkpoint, David called out. Hull integrity at 92%. Shields holding, but we're already seeing stress patterns I've never encountered before. Mary's hands moved quickly over her controls. The quantum readings are off the charts. The tear, it's not just growing anymore. It's accelerating. The ship shuddered violently as they passed through the first wave of gravitational distortion. Robert fought with the controls, his years of experience tested by forces that defied normal physics. Time dilation effects beginning, Mary reported, her voice slightly distorted by the space-time anomalies. Every minute out here is about 10 seconds for the observation fleet. Emma watched as warning lights continued to multiply across their displays. David, how's she holding together? Like a paper boat in a hurricane, he replied, rushing between different engineering stations. But I'm keeping her together. Somehow. The next wave hit them harder. Emergency lights flashed as several auxiliary systems failed at once. Through the viewport, they could see pieces of their outer hull plating being torn away by the impossible forces surrounding them. Hull integrity down to 67%. David shouted over the groaning of stressed metal. Primary shield generator is overloading. Robert's face was locked in concentration as he navigated through the chaos. The tear's gravity is trying to pull us in too fast. If we go in at this speed, we'll break apart before we can activate the inverter. Can you compensate? Emma asked, holding tight to her seat as the ship bucked and shuddered. Watch me, Robert replied, his hands moving in a complex dance across the controls. He fired thrusters in seemingly random patterns, using the tear's own gravitational forces to help control their approach. Mary's voice cut through the chaos. We're seeing something new. The time dilation is getting stronger. We might experience minutes or hours while only seconds pass for the outside world. The ship groaned again as Robert executed another impossible maneuver. Outside, the purple glow of the tear filled their entire view, its edges writhing like living things. Receiving final warnings from the Alliance fleet, Emma announced. They're predicting total structural failure in 30 seconds. David managed to laugh despite the strain. 30 seconds for them, or 30 seconds for us. Either way, Robert said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're not stopping now. We're closer than anyone's ever gotten to this thing. We can do this. Through the viewports, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. The stars behind them stretched into lines, then spirals, then shapes that human eyes couldn't understand. The tear loomed before them, no longer just a purple glow, but a gateway into what looked like both everything and nothing at once. All hands, Emma called out, her voice strong and clear despite their desperate situation. Prepare for final approach. Whatever happens next, we're making history. The Last Hope plunged deeper into the anomaly, carrying its brave crew toward either salvation or oblivion. Behind them, the Alliance vessels watched in stunned silence as the tiny human ship did what none of their advanced civilizations had dared to try. Inside the tear, reality stopped making sense. The Last Hope, shuddered as forces beyond human understanding pulled at its hull. Warning sirens blared through the ship, their sound distorting strangely in the twisted space. "Status," Emma shouted, her voice seeming to echo oddly in the cramped bridge. "Bad to worse," David responded from engineering, his hands flying over 3 different control panels. "Hull integrity at 31% and falling. Primary systems are failing faster than I can reroute power." Robert's face was covered in sweat as he wrestled with the controls. The normal rules of physics didn't apply here. Up could become down. Forward could become backward. He was flying on pure instinct now. "The quantum inverter is showing some strange readings," Mary called out, her voice tight with tension. "The formulas, they're not working like they should. The tear isn't responding to the energy signature we calculated." Through the viewports, they saw impossible things. Time and space twisted around them like a kaleidoscope. They watched their own ship pass by itself multiple times, saw events happen both forward and backward, and glimpsed realities that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. "We need to get closer to the center," Mary shouted suddenly. "The calculations were wrong because we didn't account for." She struggled to put the impossible into words. "Robert, can you get us deeper?" Robert's knuckles were white on the controls. "You're asking if I can fly us further into the thing that's trying to tear us apart." He grinned despite the situation. "Watch me." The ship plunged deeper, metal screaming in protest. Outside, the purple energy of the tear swirled around them like a living storm. Emergency lights flashed as system after system began to fail. "Main power failing," David announced, switching to backup. "Backup just failed too. We're running on emergency power only." Emma gripped her chair as the ship spun through another reality distortion. "Mary, whatever you're going to do it fast." Mary stared at her readings, her mind racing. The aliens' careful calculations, their perfect formulas. They were all wrong. Here, at the heart of the tear, she could see why. They had tried to solve this with pure logic, but this place didn't follow logical rules. "The inverter," she said suddenly. "We need to modify it. Not by the numbers, but by feeling it." She looked up at her crewmates. "Trust me." "Hull integrity at 15%, David shouted. "We've got minutes at best." "Do it," Emma ordered. "Whatever you need to do, Mary, do it now." Mary's fingers flew over her controls, making adjustments that defied every scientific principle she knew. She wasn't calculating anymore. She was playing it by ear, like a musician improvising a song. "Robert," she called out, "when I say now, fly straight for that. That spot where everything seems to fold in on itself. The spot that looks like certain death." "Got it." The ship groaned, pieces of hull peeling away like paper in a fire. David ran from station to station, keeping vital systems alive through sheer determination and engineering intuition. "Now," Mary shouted, activating the modified inverter. Robert pushed the ship forward, aiming for a point in space that seemed to both exist and not exist at the same time. The quantum inverter hummed to life, its energy mixing with the tear's impossible forces. "Hull integrity critical," David yelled. "She's breaking apart." "Hold on," Emma ordered. "Just a few more seconds." Time seemed to stop. In that frozen moment, they saw everything at once. Past, present, future, all mixing together in the heart of the tear. The inverter's energy pulse shot out, not fighting against the tear's chaos, but becoming part of it, dancing with it, guiding it. Then reality itself seemed to bend. A ship spun wildly as space twisted around them. Through the viewports, they watched as the tear began to fold in on itself, pulled by the inverter's carefully tuned pulse. "It's working," Mary shouted in disbelief. "It's actually working." "Get us out of here," Emma commanded. "Robert, full power to whatever engines we have left." As the tear began to collapse behind them, the last hope shot forward, riding the wave of collapsing space-time, its crew holding on for dear life as they raced between the possible and impossible, between certain death and unlikely survival. They had done it, not with advanced alien technology or perfect calculations, but with human instinct, courage, and the willingness to break every rule in the book. The observation fleet of the Galactic Alliance hung motionless in space, their sensors recording the impossible. Where the massive tear had been, there was now only a stunning phenomenon. A swirling nebula of purple and blue energies, beautiful but harmless. And emerging from this cosmic light show came the battered form of the Last Hope, barely recognizable as a ship anymore. "This is Captain Emma Rogers of the Earth vessel Last Hope." Emma's tired voice transmitted across all frequencies. "Mission accomplished. The tear has been sealed." The Alliance channels erupted with countless responses in dozens of languages. The ship that had a 0.1% chance of success had just rewritten what the galaxy thought was possible. Inside the Last Hope, the crew looked like they had aged years in what had been just hours for the outside world. David sat on the floor of engineering, surrounded by burnt-out panels and emergency patch jobs. "I don't know how," he said with a tired smile, but she held together. Barely. Mary was still at her station, staring at the readings from where the tear had been. "We didn't just seal it," she said in wonder. "We transformed it. The energy, it's stable now. Beautiful, even." Robert's hands finally loosened from the controls, shaking slightly. Not bad for a bunch of primitive humans. The ship limped back toward the Alliance fleet, emergency systems keeping them moving. Through their viewports, they could see the gathered alien vessels moving closer, their crews no doubt trying to understand how the humans had succeeded where their advanced calculations said failure was certain. A transmission came through from the Galactic Council. The Luminar representative, Dawn, spoke first. We must admit an error in our understanding. Our calculations were perfect, but they failed to account for something we did not know existed." "And what's that?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "The human factor," Dawn replied. "The ability to adapt, to trust instinct over data, to find solutions that defy logical analysis. We have much to learn from your species." Over the next few days, as the crew of the Last Hope recovered, and their ship was carefully preserved as a historical artifact, the story spread throughout the galaxy. The nebula created from the sealed tear became known as the Human Star, a permanent reminder that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from perfect calculations, but from courage and determination. 1 month later, Emma and her crew stood before the full Galactic Council. The massive chamber was packed with representatives from every Alliance species, all gathered to witness something unprecedented. For the first time in the history of the Alliance, Dawn announced, their crystalline form glowing with respect, "We bestow our highest honor upon members of a species previously considered primitive." As medals were placed around their necks, Emma looked at her crew. David, who had kept their ship together with skill and stubbornness. Mary, who had dared to trust instinct over calculation at the crucial moment. Robert, who had flown through impossible conditions with a smile on his face. "The galaxy has changed," Dawn continued. "We now understand that advancement is not merely measured in technology or scientific understanding. It is measured in courage, in the willingness to risk everything for others, in the ability to face the impossible and find a way through." After the ceremony, the crew stood at a viewport, looking out at the Human Star shining in the distance. Its purple and blue lights seemed to dance, an eternal testament to their achievement. "They still don't quite understand, do they?" Robert said, watching alien ships study the phenomenon. "They think we succeeded because we're special somehow." Emma smiled. "But we're not special. We're just human. We've always been the ones crazy enough to try the impossible. And sometimes," Mary added, "that's exactly what the universe needs." David laughed. "Well, next time there's an impossible problem that needs solving, at least they'll know who to call." As they stood there, Ships from across the galaxy continued to arrive, their crews hoping to study both the human star and the species that had created it. But more importantly, they came to learn about courage, about hope, and about the special kind of madness that makes humans brave enough to attempt the impossible. The tear in space was gone, but it had left something more important in its wake. A new understanding in the galaxy that sometimes the craziest plan is the only plan that can work, and that bravery is not measured in calculations, but in the willingness to try when all logic says you should not.